Israel is perhaps facing one of the most difficult moments in the recent times. This time, the crisis is not from any adversary or any foreign extremist organization. This time, the crisis is internal and is entirely homemade. Surprisingly, no alarms are being blared, no missiles are being fired, and there is no red alert. But the country seems to be in grave danger. And last week, in a very surprising move, fighter pilots in an elite Israeli Air Force squadron had vowed not to attend training in an unprecedented protest against the government. Nearly all of the 40 reservist pilots from 69th Squadron had refused to join a one-day training exercise that was scheduled for last week. That was seen as an unparalleled move by some of Israel's most strategically important reservists. In this video, we explain what are the underlying reasons for which these pilots had refused to train and why these protests have been going on since months. But before that, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to One India. Let's very briefly talk about the 69th Squadron first. The 69th Squadron, also known by the name Hammers, is one of the Israeli Air Force's most elite units. The squadron operates advanced F-15 Thunderbird aircraft that serve as Israeli military's long-range attack arm. In 2007, the squadron and its reserve soldiers had participated in the attack on the nuclear reactor in Syria. Over the years, this squadron has been active in Israel's operations against Iran's and Hezbollah's entrenchment in Syria. Apart from the 69th Squadron, around 150 Israeli army reservists who serve as cyber specialists had also announced that they will stop reporting for duty. Among the reserve personnel were officers in the ranks of colonel, lieutenant colonel and major. But why? Why did around 40 reserve pilots and 150 cyber experts decide to do that? The answer lies in Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's insistence on the so-called judicial reforms. Just 2 months back, Justice Minister Yariv Levin had presented plans for what the newly elected right-wing government had described a reform of governance. Those proposals included several legislative initiatives aimed at limiting the power of the Israeli Supreme Court and the legal advisors to the government. Massive protests had broken out and protesters had held Israeli flags and signs that said criminal government, the end of democracy, and had also shouted other similar slogans. Now, let's look at these issues in a little detail. The first controversial proposal is that of a derogation clause or an override clause that would allow the Israel's parliament to annul a Supreme Court decision with just a simple majority. What this means is that suppose the Israel Supreme Court rules on anything very reformative, but if the lawmakers are not in favor of it due to their political calculations, then they can overturn that decision just by a simple majority. In the current scheme of things, the Supreme Court can't just discard government decisions or legislation. It must rule that the action being cancelled contradicts one of Israel's basic laws. There are 12 laws that are supposed to be a foundation for a future Israeli constitution. But what this plan envisages is that it would give the smallest possible majority in the Knesset, 61 lawmakers out of 120, the power to then override the Supreme Court. Israel does not have a constitution and the separation of powers between the legislative and executive branches is very weak. This makes the Supreme Court the only institution with the power to limit government actions and legislation passed by a parliamentary majority. But this proposal would take that power away. Another major point of contention is about changing the composition of the committee that selects Israel's judges. This part, if agreed upon, would increase the power of the politicians and decrease that of judges and lawyers, effectively giving the government the power to appoint judges and, more critically, the Supreme Court justices. Then there are plans to turn the legal advisors who report to the Attorney General into political appointments totally controlled by ministers. This matters because if a minister wants to take illegal action, the legal advisor's role is to warn them that they are planning an illegal move and to raise the matter with the Attorney General. Under the proposed arrangement, the legal advisors chosen by the ministers will lack the independence to challenge the politicians. Another proposal would take away the Supreme Court's authority to review the legality of Israel's basic laws, which function as the country's constitution. Protesters fear the legal reforms may diminish the checks and balances within the Israeli state. And finally, the nail in the coffin is to cancel the reasonableness standard that has been used by the court over the years to reverse government decisions. All these would effectively make the Supreme Court an exercise in futility and an institution that would just be a paper tiger. The opponents of the move claim that Netanyahu is doing this to cling on to power, to make the judiciary pliant so that he could have his corruption charges thrown away. And that is why tens of thousands of Israelis have been protesting against these judicial reforms. And that is precisely why these pilots had refused to join training, claiming these proposals a democratic coup. We hope you would like this new video. Thank you for watching.